In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to create clouds. There are different ways to go about it. There is an example on the Chaos Group's website, which is pretty good. The only thing that I don't like about this one is that it has a flat bottom. So basically, if you open their project file, the smoke is being emitted from a plane like this, and it gets you a pretty nice cloud, but it's always gonna be flat on the bottom, which you can hide pretty well with color correction and lighting. But I was trying to find a way to create a cloud that's sort of nice from all angles. So this is what I came up with. When you render it, it looks something like this. And then when you copy them around, you can get some sort of a sky happening. So it looks pretty nice. You can get close to it. And then, you can just basically select the Phoenix grid, hold shift, drag until you have maybe 2 of them in the scene. And then if you put your camera over here, you can get some kind of a pretty convincing cloud scene happen. So let me show you how to set that up. All right, so in this case, I'm working in meters and 1 unit is 1 meter. I ended up making this kind of a shape and it's over 1,000 meters long, so it's huge. And basically I just made a sphere, and then you can hit R for scale and just sort of scale it around. You're trying to get that kind of a weird sort of cloud shape, maybe something like this. And then I would just go and maybe give it 80 segments so you have some resolution, and then go under modifiers and add a noise. And then I'm just gonna look at what settings I used for the noise. So I did 113 for scale, and then these numbers here, 135, 88, and 145 for the strength. So I'm just gonna copy the noise, paste it onto this one, and then maybe we can modify this a little bit. So maybe you can make the scale a bit smaller. Remember, this is where the smoke is gonna be emitted out of, so you wanna avoid that super uniform look. You don't want the cloud to look like a mushroom sort of nuclear bomb. You really want something that's broken up. That's why I'm adding the noise here. Then before you forget, as always, I would right click, go to object properties, make it not renderable. And I would right click again, Phoenix FD properties, make it not a solid object, so that the smoke is not gonna be bouncing off of this as if it's a solid object. We don't want that. Next step, you would create a standard Phoenix fire source like we've done many times before, and just add your sphere as the emitter for the smoke. The outgoing velocity for the smoke is animated from 2,000 meters to 0 over 20 frames. So like we did before, you would just set auto key, go to frame 0, set this to 2,000, and then go to frame 20 and set this to 0, make a key, turn off auto key. So you have that happening. You can give it a noise of 0.5, so noise will just give you more of that randomized look of the emission of the smoke. So you have some areas where there's more smoke and some areas where there's less. We want to turn off temperature, only leave smoke enabled, and everything else can stay at default. Now, one important thing here is that we're actually using a texture map for the emission of the smoke, for the outgoing velocity basically. So as you can see here, basically the areas that are black, less smoke is being emitted, and areas that are white, more smoke is being emitted. So you want to create the texture map to plug into that slot over here. So I would just go under materials, and you can click on diffuse and create a gradient ramp. And basically you want this side to be white and this side to be that dark gray, and maybe make this one gray as well. Set the noise amount to 1 and size to 5, and set it to turbulence, and just apply that to your object and say show map in viewport. And you can play with the tiling, maybe make it 1.4. Obviously the UVW mapping is all messed up, but really this doesn't affect it as much. It's really just to add a bit more detail on top of the noise. So then you can just copy this mask, paste it into the mask slot over here. I already have that map in there, so I'm not gonna touch it, but you just go right click and paste as instance into this slot. So now that you know how to get this far, I'm gonna delete this one and just go back to my original. So for the grid resolution, I ended up doing cell size of 5 meters, which gave me around 8 million total cells. So pretty high resolution, and I would say the higher the resolution, the better, because then you're gonna get more of that beautiful edge detail in the cloud, which also makes it look larger scale. So I would definitely go high up on the resolution, but for now, let's make it maybe 7 meters for now, just so that it's faster. I'm doing adaptive grid of smoke with a threshold of 0.002. So again, the grid will expand as the cloud sort of rises. Under dynamics, important parameter is smoke buoyancy. We need the cloud to be rising up. And since we're not emitting any temperature, it will stay in place by default. So you need to raise the buoyancy for it to rise up and form the cloud. We're doing 1.0 for large scale and 0.3 for smoke surface massive vorticity. Randomized amount of 0.4. PCG symmetric conservation with 30 quality and 2 steps per frame. Everything else stays at default. So really these settings are almost default. The only thing that you're really changing that matters is the buoyancy. And then you can play with some of the vorticity settings and the randomization to get a bit different look of the little puffs of the cloud. But really super simple settings. So the most important thing here really is just the shape of the cloud and then the resolution. With all of this in place, I'm gonna run the sim and show you one more important thing. All right, so the simulation is running. It's gonna look pretty bad in the beginning, but as the smoke starts rising up, it's gonna all mix together and these lines are gonna disappear and it's gonna get you that cloud look that we're after. All right, so our cloud is rising up and everything is looking nice. Now the issue that you're gonna run into is that even though we made this cloud object not a solid object, there's still a bunch of smoke stuck inside. And that basically will just ruin everything, because if I pause the simulation and I click on this cloud object, go to object properties and make it display as box so we can see on the inside, you can see that yes, this cloud looks good, but we have this area of smoke down here. So what I ended up doing is let it run until you like this cloud, pause the simulation, and then right click on the cloud object, go to Phoenix FD properties and set clear inside as enabled. So clear inside will kill anything that's inside of the volume, but you cannot leave this checked in the beginning because then it will kill all of the cloud in the beginning. You have to let the simulation run until you have the cloud in there, then pause the simulation, enable clear inside, say okay, and then continue the simulation. And as you'll see, on frame 41, it will kill all of the smoke and it's gone. So now I can basically pause, or at this point even stop the simulation, because we have our final cloud. And this is basically it. This is your cloud that doesn't have a flat bottom, that basically looks good from all sides. I can even flip it upside down and still looks good, even like this. So at this point, when you're happy with everything, I would just go back and raise the resolution again. So maybe I would make this 5 meter cell size to get nicer detail. And then like we did before, at this point you can just select this cloud, hold shift and drag to copy it around, and you can copy it around a few times. It'll work just fine. Phoenix is aware of what's happening because it's reading the cache from the same place for every grid. So, you know, maybe you could then copy another one to the right here, and then you just place your camera and you can get a nice cloud scene happen that way. Now, one thing we haven't touched on yet is the look of the smoke. So definitely I've already improved this. By default, the smoke is dark gray, which doesn't work. So we need to go, as always, under the volumetric options. And then under smoke opacity, you can play with the smoke rendering mode. So right now it's based on smoke, but you can also just say simple smoke and get a different kind of a puffy look like this. If you set it to based on smoke, you get this diagram that you can play with. And basically this controls which opacity is actually visible. So as you drag this, you can put it basically below 0 and drag, and it'll slowly kill off the smoke based on the amount of it in certain places. So I can make it look much thicker like this, or I can drag to the right and just sort of kill it off from the edges. And it can get you some nice sort of fades on the fringes of the clouds to get a different kind of look. So I actually kind of like the puffiness, so I think I'm gonna make it a bit thicker. So maybe I would go with something like this. But you can also just switch it back to simple smoke if you like. It looks kind of more like steam, but then you get the simple smoke opacity and you can make it thicker. I feel like we kind of stopped the simulation a bit too early. There's still a bunch of that leftover smoke down here. So I would just let it run for maybe 20 more frames just so that it rises up and it's not stuck down here. And for the smoke color, basically you just want to do pure white. So obviously if it's dark, it's just going to look like dark smoke. You want to make it as bright as possible, so white would work. And a very nice setting you can play with is the external scatter multiplier. So there is light basically protruding going into the cloud. And if you raise this number, it'll affect how much light is allowed to go into the cloud. So if I raise this up, you can see it sort of gets brighter on the inside and everywhere because the light is allowed to pass through. And it makes it look again like a more sort of a lighter. And for the lighting, it's pretty standard. I just have a regular V-Ray sun in here. I am not using the V-Ray exposure control, which means that I had to lower the intensity of the sun all the way down to 0.01. And then you can play with the horizon offset to control where the ground is and where the sky is basically. So I ended up raising this number just to basically have a ground down here and then have a sky up here. Or you can just render it against a transparent background and then just add a background in After Effects. So I would just place my camera maybe something like this and hit render and see what we get. Alright, so this is how the raw render looks with just some V-Ray sun. I think it's a pretty nice cloud look. Obviously just the resolution is too low, so it looks kind of blurry. But after you resim with more res, it might look different. And again, this is the simple smoke rendering mode. If you go back and change this to, volumetric options and set it to based on smoke, you're gonna get that different kind of smoke look, and you can play with the diagram here to maybe bring more of it back. So maybe something like that. And you can, maybe put your camera over here and render that and see how that looks different. So this is what it looks like in the based on smoke rendering mode, just kind of a different look. And after you bring this into After Effects, basically I would just add some curves for contrast. You can play with the way it's imported in After Effects. So if you right click and you go interpret footage main, you can play with how it interprets the alpha. You can do straight unmatted, say okay, and you can just do Control Y and create like a blue background, sort of a sky look. Right? And you can put that under the cloud. And here you go. You have basically just the cloud on a transparent background. So a lot of times people message me and they say, hey, I import my fire or my smoke into After Effects and it's not working, it's not showing up, it's not working properly. And it's almost always the interpret footage. So you can play with this to get the look that you want. Usually straight unmatted will give you the best sort of alpha with clear edges. And then you can just play with the color correction with the background to get the cloud look that you want. So as always, I hope that you guys found this helpful. Go ahead and create some clouds, and I'll see you in the next lesson.